Hollywood has been having a really rough time lately. Everybody's been talking about the box office bombs, the unprofitable streaming services, the decrease in movie quality, the culture wars, the union strikes. But the damage caused by one issue in particular for this industry is a lot more difficult to measure. A little thing called piracy. When you take a look at a lot of trends and data, online piracy might actually be making Hollywood's profits disappear faster than its flight logs to Jeffrey Epstein's island. But other industries are impacted by piracy as well. Music, video games, software. But what is it about movies and TV in particular that makes piracy such a massive threat to those industries? This is how illegal piracy is plundering Hollywood's booty. My name's Kyle Beauregard. Back in 2003, I illegally downloaded a copy of Kazam from LimeWire.
FBI, open up!
The feds kicked in my door, there was a 51-day siege, and they threw me in Gitmo for 20 years for illegally downloading a movie. I got out earlier this year and made this channel, Bingeonomics, where I talk about wealth, economics, and shady industries, so make sure to subscribe for more. Now, before we get into how much of an impact online piracy has on Hollywood, let's take a look at the history of internet piracy. And to start, we need to go back to 1987. Personal computers are still in their infancy, but the opportunities they would offer to many young tech-savvy geeks would be immeasurable. One of them was 7-year-old Sean Parker. In second grade, his dad would teach him how to program on an Atari 800 computer. His dad also told him, if you're gonna take risks, take them early before you have a family. Sage advice, though when he mentioned risks, he probably didn't mean to start hacking into universities and Fortune 500 companies. But when Sean was 16 years old, that's what he did.
Just what is this main artery of the information superhighway?
All on a new frontier called the World Wide Web. Well, until the FBI tracked him down through his ISP. Luckily for him, he was a minor and was only sentenced to community service. Fast forward to 1999. Technology kept evolving, but it was still simpler times. It was all about those old fruit-colored iMacs, the Nintendo 64. And maybe, if you were super cool, a flip phone. But there was also another technology starting to take root in popularity. MP3. Designed to compress audio files from CDs to store on other devices, it made it possible for anyone to share music over the internet. And one program in particular made it easy for anyone. It was called Napster. Created by 19-year-old Sean and a friend he met on the internet, Sean Fanning. Napster was a peer-to-peer file sharing service that allowed users to share and download MP3 music files for free. This was a time when music was primarily consumed through purchasing physical CDs. So the concept of downloading and sharing music for free, though illegal, was revolutionary and led to widespread copyright infringement.
If we are going to sell our music on the internet in whatever way we so choose, we cannot do that if the guy next door is giving it away for free.
The guy next door is an unlikely revolutionary.
Soon after its launch, Napster encountered severe legal issues. Numerous major recording companies and artists sued for copyright infringement. In 2000, a court injunction mandated the removal of all copyrighted material from its network, and the company went bankrupt shortly after.
Napster users had downloaded an estimated 250 million songs over the weekend.
But don't feel too bad for Sean. Not long after, he was brought on as president of Facebook when it was only 5 months old, and is currently a multi-billionaire. But Napster was only the start. Following its shutdown, other P2P file sharing programs began popping up. Remember LimeWire? If you were around in the early 2000s, you know that LimeWire did two things: provide you with an endless supply of free music, and completely annihilate your family computer with viruses and internet pornography that you totally didn't download yourself.
Wow. I didn't know that. You're telling me now for the first time.
The MP3s were infinite and free. You could burn as many CDs as you wanted, or even fill up an entire original iPod. Yeah, all 5 gigabytes. Now, the thing LimeWire did differently than Napster was it decentralized its servers. And as technology grew and internet speeds got faster, more people could share large files, including movies and television shows. At this point, you could pirate just about any media that you wanted. LimeWire eventually hit the same legal fate as Napster did. In 2010, the service shut down and the creator, Mark Gorton, agreed to pay record labels $105 million, which was kind of a bargain given they originally wanted $72 trillion.
Sounds good.
Literally more than the entire world's GDP. Nonetheless, the floodgates were open and there was nothing any corporation could do to stop it. One of the reasons was because torrenting is a file distribution system that is really difficult to actually shut down. Simply put, instead of having a central server, users download files from thousands of other people who have already downloaded that file themselves. Meaning piracy sites don't actually have to host the file themselves, only the links that connect these pirates with each other. That's why sites like the Pirate Bay or Kick-Ass Torrents keep popping back up. If authorities take them down, the entire site can be re-uploaded elsewhere with only a few gigabytes. Then of course, piracy streaming sites hosted in other countries, like 123 Movies or Putlocker, can easily skirt around more restrictive copyright law. In fact, these streaming sites may actually be more responsible for movie and TV piracy than the torrenting ones. According to NERA Economic Consulting, in 2023, illegal streaming sites are responsible for 80% of movie and TV piracy. So the first question is, exactly how much does this impact Hollywood? The movie and TV business has been struggling for quite some time. Emerging technologies have made it difficult for studios to compete for viewers' eyeballs. With so much video content like YouTube available online, as well as social media, podcasts, gaming, apps, and so much other stuff, movies and TV just aren't as culturally important as they were, say, 20 years ago. But the easy availability of piracy is another technological issue that's hard to measure the cost of for the entertainment industry. After all, tracking it is nearly impossible. And even if you do, who's to say what percentage of those who pirate a movie or show would have paid to watch it otherwise? Still, we can take a look at some data. NERA Economic Consulting had an interesting study in 2017 that suggested that the revenue lost by the US movie and television industry due to piracy was between $45 and $111 billion annually. Which seems high, but to the study's credit, the methodology seems pretty good. They tallied the 26 billion viewings of US-produced movies and 126 billion viewings of US-produced television episodes on piracy sites, and assumed that between 14 and 34% would have been paid for if it had not been available through piracy, which they, based on their prior research, believed to be an accurate proportion. That's how they landed on this $45 to $111 billion range. Their estimate is that digital piracy is likely impacting these industries by about 11 to 24% in lost revenue. That was in 2017, and things have gotten worse for the industry since then, mainly because of the streaming industry.
And it's not just Disney. Streaming subscriber growth is stalling across the board, as we heard from Paramount and Warner Brothers this quarter.
The reality is, as soon as a movie or a television episode hits a streaming platform like Netflix or Disney+, a full HD copy will become easily available on multiple piracy websites pretty much immediately, oftentimes within an hour. If you watched my Why Disney is Collapsing video, you'll know that streaming services are getting smoked financially. The pivot from traditional cable packages to streaming services has crippled TV revenue, as streaming only generates 1/6 of the revenue that cable once did. The only two platforms that are profitable are Netflix and Hulu. All the rest are bleeding money. Disney Plus, for instance, is losing $1 billion every quarter. What we're seeing is that people are increasingly annoyed with how fragmented streaming has gotten. People are refusing to subscribe to 2, 3, or 4 services. Back when Netflix was having so much license to it, it was great. Now, in order to get everything you want, a lot of people need 7 or 8 subscriptions. This has led to a huge spike in what's called service hopping, where users subscribe to one service, cancel, and then move on to the next. But the other variable people don't talk about is online piracy has gotten so convenient that service hopping itself is just an extra step when a perfect quality copy of anything released on a streaming platform is one quick Google search away. Even movies that were supposed to be theatrically released have taken major hits. During the pandemic, piracy of major movies spiked massively. 41% in the US, and even more so in other countries. The reason being was these movies were released directly to streaming platforms when theaters were shut down, which meant a full HD copy of movies were available on piracy sites on day one. This spike obviously corrected to an extent once things opened back up, but it's still not over.
There is no going back to normal.
With such an emphasis put on streaming, theatrical movies oftentimes are released on these digital platforms sooner. This is usually to encourage customers to sign up for these streaming services. But as many have pointed out, an unintentional side effect of that initiative is that it sort of trains customers to just wait for these movies to be released on streaming, which already generates way less money than a movie theater ticket. And that's if the studio's lucky enough the user doesn't just watch a pirated copy that gets put on the internet the same day. The reality is, people will pay for convenience. But when piracy is literally easier than staying on top of what is available on a dozen separate streaming platforms, a lot of people will choose to pirate simply for that convenience. And on that note, let's talk about why more people are choosing to pirate. Now, I think there are 6 major reasons why people are choosing to pirate movies and TV shows more often. But before I break them down, I want to add a disclaimer. I'm not advocating for piracy, nor am I casting a moral judgment on those who do it. Think of me as Switzerland on this issue. These are just the reasons why I think that people are more likely to choose the pirate life as of late. Firstly, and likely the most important, piracy is easier and faster than ever. Piracy websites are more easily accessible than ever, and streaming in particular makes it so content is made available practically immediately. Secondly, there's the cost of content. One of the consequences of the fragmented streaming industry is that there are now so many services people need to pay for. And oftentimes, the only reason people subscribe to one is because there's a single show they want to watch. And with subscription cost increases for streaming becoming routine, it's gotten to the point where all of the individual subscriptions end up costing nearly as much as the traditional cable packages that led people to switch to streaming to begin with. People are also more tech savvy than they were 15 to 20 years ago. Back when Napster and LimeWire were hot, the internet wasn't a huge part of everybody's life.
You mean you can take a movie and they'll put it on the hard drive and you can show it back?
Yeah.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. Here it is right here.
Most people were more casual about being online, and the internet was still mostly a den for geeks. These programs, although popular, weren't as broadly used as the pirating sites of today, many of which don't even require an application anymore, just a quick Google search. There's also less risk. Back in the day, downloading a movie on LimeWire was essentially playing Russian roulette with your PC. It was only a matter of time before your computer died for your sins, and that's just not the case anymore. A divisive Hollywood is also not helping with the piracy issue. People talk about Hollywood being divisive a lot, but one of the more overlooked outcomes is that Hollywood's polarization is very likely pushing more people towards supporting piracy. Not going to beat the dead horse too much on this one, but a huge portion of the population has been alienated by Hollywood. They're talked down to if they don't support the same social or political talking points, and they're sick of the constant propaganda being shoved into every piece of media that's produced. A good example was watching the entire Hollywood system endorse the shutdown of businesses, including restaurants and stores throughout the pandemic, while demonizing those who were desperate just to stay open, all while they themselves were classified and protected as a quote, essential industry.
Everything I own is being taken away from me, and they set up a movie company right next to my outdoor patio, which is right over here.
Posting this video on social media after she saw production tents and tables set up in a parking lot just a few feet from the outdoor dining area she's not allowed to use.
Hollywood did not build up any good faith with a sizable chunk of the country throughout that whole ordeal. And I think if you look at the people who specifically fall on the opposite side of the culture wars as Hollywood does, their tolerance for piracy has probably shot through the roof. All you really need to look at is the general opinions of any trending story surrounding Hollywood, like the actor and writer strikes, and you'll see a big chunk of the population is actively rooting for the industry to collapse. There has never been a time where such a big chunk of society is rooting for Hollywood to fail so hard. There's just no way you're not seeing a huge spike in piracy from that side in particular, just as a big middle finger. And I understand a completely valid counterpoint to that way of thinking is that if you don't pay for these movies and shows and you're still watching them, they'll eventually go away. But I think the general sentiment is that a lot of these people genuinely don't care.
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care. Let me tell you something. We don't care.
And if that were to happen, they would just watch something on YouTube or listen to podcasts or play video games or watch The Sopranos for the 20th time and be just as happy. I think Hollywood has overplayed its hand to an extent in terms of how valuable they think they are, when in reality, new shows and movies just aren't as important to people's lives as the industry thinks. Basically, I think a growing sentiment that exists from a certain side is this: I don't like Hollywood, but I'll watch some of its mindless entertainment as long as I don't support it with my money. And if it all collapses, then that's just a bonus. And then I'll just replace that mindless entertainment with something else and be just as happy. Nothing of value was lost. I'm not saying that viewpoint is right, I'm just saying I think it's a growing sentiment. If I worked in Hollywood, personally, I would be concerned that I've alienated such a huge part of the population to the point where that line of thinking is becoming commonplace. And on that note, let's talk about broader public opinions on piracy. If we look at some 2022 YouGov data, we'll see that a lot of consumers are pirating content. When asked if they actively search for pirated content, 35% of those polled yes, where only 30% said no. We also see that younger people are more likely to pirate. When it comes to 18 to 24-year-olds, that number jumps to 44% yes and 19% no, which indicates that piracy rates will continue going up. But what's more interesting is, according to Variety, 53% of people who accessed pirated content agree that doing so is morally wrong. This suggests that all of these other variables are more important than the morality of piracy to most viewers. And let's be totally honest, even those who acknowledge piracy is morally wrong, I don't think many people look at it as a particularly egregious act. Like if a friend told you they pirated a movie, even if a person is staunchly against piracy, they're probably not going to see it as some major significant flaw in their friend's character. From a moral standpoint, most people probably rank internet piracy somewhere between jaywalking and peeing on a building. The point is, there's a reason why these don't pirate campaigns have never worked, and usually end up just becoming memes.
We need your help. When you buy pirated movie and music, you support criminals.
So if studios are hoping to lean into the morality tactic, it's dead in the water. What is for certain is Hollywood is really struggling to endure technological changes. The music industry went through a very similar battle with online piracy early on, but it was able to utilize new platforms and technology to, generally speaking, remove the need for online piracy. Simply put, the music industry adapted, Hollywood hasn't. To combat piracy and adapt to the evolving digital landscape, the music industry embraced innovation.
Music should be available to anybody that wants to hear it.
The pivotal factor was the introduction of subscription models. Platforms like Spotify and Apple Music have accessibility and affordability. On one hand, they offer freemium models, providing users with free ad-supported versions, as well as premium ad-free versions for a monthly fee. When you have access to literally any music track you want for 10 or 12 bucks a month, it completely kills the need for piracy. Services like Spotify give you everything you want in the most convenient way. The music industry understands that people don't want fragmented services. If you could only listen to Blink-182 on Spotify, and only listen to Marshmello on Apple Music, and only listen to Bad Bunny on Amazon Music, that would be hella annoying, and people would be more likely to embrace illegal downloading for their music. The music industry has instead embraced centralizing all the music on single platforms, and then those platforms compete with each other in other ways. features, prices, things like exclusive podcast content, etc. Now, in Hollywood's defense, that is harder because movies and TV shows are more expensive than music. But at the same time, back in the late 90s and early 2000s, people bought CDs for like $17 a pop, which is more than what a movie ticket costs today. If a CD was $17 in the year 2000, if you factor in inflation, that's like $30 in 2023. That's what people were paying for CDs. One could argue that because of all the entertainment options available, movie and TV content just isn't worth what it used to be, and that the industry is currently experiencing a market correction, which is a tough pill to swallow given how overinflated movie and TV budgets have gotten. Maybe the solution is to one day have a similar platform that gets to license all the movie and TV content, like the music platforms do. Obviously, it would need to cost more than what Spotify charges for all its music, but that convenience factor would probably be the variable that stops piracy and keeps people consistently paying.
Piracy.
Then again, it's also got to be cheaper than older cable packages in order to sway people over. Still, if there was a streaming service that offered you access to every movie and TV show, what would you be willing to pay for it? And tell us in the comments section below, how much content have you illegally pirated? I'm just kidding. I'm not a Fed. But hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching.